hypnotherapy was really the mother of all psychotherapy, certainly in the West with Franz Anton Mesmer, who got amazing results with people. It sort of went underground for a while, and until recently it was seen as something alternative. But actually, I would say that, used well within a really intelligent, common sense psychotherapeutic framework can be the most powerful thing that you can use in order to enhance performance, but also overcome all kinds of problems in life.
Our subject today is a really serious one, depression. A recent CDC study found that 9.1% of those in the study met the criteria for current depression. That criteria was experiencing significant symptoms for at least 2 weeks before the survey, and results concluded that 4.1% who had met that criteria for major depression. If you suffer from depression, if you live with or know a depressed person, or if you treat people with clinical depression, today's guest will give you valuable insights. Clinical or major depression is the world's #1 mental disorder, and the second most disabling condition in the world behind heart disease. Our guest today, Mark Tyrrell, treats clients with a range of problems, including clinical depression, panic attacks, and PTSD.
Mark, welcome to the show. We're certainly honored to have you here today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi, Mark.
So how did you get started? How did you find and develop an interest in hypnosis?
Well, I've always been interested in the mind and psychology. And I always remember my father telling me, as a small boy, that he'd broken his arm when he was a small boy, and being taken to the hospital where it was decided they'd have to reset his arm. And his doctor didn't anesthetize him in the general way, but used hypnosis and told him he wouldn't feel any pain, would sleep well, and would heal up very fast, all of which happened. And so this was sort of a family story which always piqued my interest. In the late 80s, I worked in psychiatric hospitals, and I was amazed how people with all kinds of problems were being treated purely with drugs, with no sort of therapy at all. Their wider lives weren't being looked at. And when I started using hypnosis after working in these places, I found that the same types of problems could be treated powerfully and naturally using hypnosis and effective psychotherapy. And it was fantastic to actually be helping people by tapping into their own potential to change, rather than just giving them drugs.
Well, Mark, after spending all of these years in hypnosis, what have you come to believe? There are so many definitions. What do you think hypnosis really is? And what personal experiences brought you to believe that it really is a necessary tool for any therapist to have? Or do you believe that?
I certainly do. I think anybody, not just therapists, but people who work with people, should understand how human beings go in and out of hypnosis naturally all the time. So firstly, I believe hypnosis is a natural state of mind and body, and as such, you'd expect it to happen spontaneously, whether we're officially being hypnotized or not. And I think there's a profound element of disassociation when we enter trance state. So, an everyday naturally occurring trance state might be when we're reading an engrossing book or watching a movie or daydreaming, and someone calls us and we hear them, but we don't hear them. Okay, so we're associated to the contents of what we're focusing on inwardly, and external reality is less focused on. Okay, and the deepest every day, or should I say every night, naturally occurring hypnotic state would be, in my belief, a dream. Okay, we all dream, so we all enter profound states of hypnosis. Right. Where we become completely disassociated from our beds or our bedrooms, to the extent that we're totally unaware of where we are physically, and we're totally associated to the contents of our imagination, which is the dream state. So I think we can also access this kind of state through the waking medium. We don't have to be asleep in order to dream in this way. So for example, there are other similarities between the rapid eye movement state or dream state and hypnosis. And you remember the sort of cliched way of getting someone into hypnosis would be to swing a watch in front of them so that you're getting their eyes to flip from side to side, which happens when people dream at night as well. And this seems to be an artificial way of getting people into the REM state. other sort of similarities. You notice when you hypnotize people, sometimes they experience catalepsy, where they have, their anti-gravity muscles are inhibited, so they might feel numb. You can anesthetize them, or you might lift an arm and it becomes rock-like in the air, and so forth. And of course, we all naturally experience catalepsy when we dream at night, because nature doesn't want us acting out our dreams. So there are these, and of course, when we dream, we're totally engaged in a reality which is inwardly generated through the imagination. And again, this often happens when we go into hypnosis, that we have a sort of dream scenario which can be directed by the hypnotist. Now, the other interesting thing about the REM state in hypnosis is that we experience most rapid eye movement actually before birth, in the last trimester of fetal development, which is when it seems that instincts are programmed into the developing fetus. So we come into the world with prepackaged, hardwired instincts to cry, to fear heights, and suckle, and bond with the mother, and so forth. Now, it kind of it seems to be that the rapid eye movement state, or hypnotic state, is a medium through which instincts can be updated. People can learn to instinctively respond differently. With addiction and fear and anxiety and depression and so forth. So there is this big link to hypnosis and dreaming, I think. Firstly, there are two ways to enter hypnosis. One is through progressive relaxation, and the other is through shock, which is a technique beloved of stage hypnotists. And, so sometimes when you're drifting off to sleep, you suddenly twitch. And and sometimes you're aware of yourself doing this, which isn't not so great if you're on the train or something and you've got a cup of coffee in your hand. But this happens when the REM machinery in your brain is about to start firing to produce dreams, and it's also called the PGO spike, the electrical spike in the brain gets fired. And this happens before we dream, before we go into REM, but also when we're in shock or surprise. Now, people often say that during emergencies, suddenly everything feels dreamlike, or goes into slow motion during the car crash and so forth. And this will be because the person has flipped into a wide awake hypnotic REM state by through the shocking emergency. Now, PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, when we experience an emergency, we become very suggestible because we've been shocked into the REM state whilst we're wide awake, and it's a sort of hypnotic. It's not an enjoyable hypnotic experience, but it's a hypnotic experience. And we become programmed during that time. It might be only a few seconds. And then later on, we have post-hypnotic triggers, or otherwise known as flashbacks, that take us back to that original programming, if you like. So that would be an example of a symptomatic trance state. Also, of course, when we become focused, when we're very emotional, our focus of attention narrows down, which is another feature of trance. You become locked onto something. So you're angry or you're jealous, and you tend to, focus down and forget stuff around you. If you're very angry, you'll have noticed self-consciousness disappears. So the most shy, self-conscious person, if they become enraged with somebody, they forget all that. They could go into the staff room at work and shout out at somebody. And and only afterwards they feel a bit embarrassed that they actually, did that, because generally they're a shy person, perhaps. So, they were locked onto this state of mind, and during these times we become more suggestible. Worrying tends to be, depression, involves a lot of worrying, a lot of anxiety, a lot of sort of rumination, catastrophizing about the future, regretting about the past. All of this is of course generated inwardly. So the person is disassociating from the outside, associating more to the sort of these destructive inner patterns. And that would be a kind of trance state. When I used to work in the psychiatric wards, sometimes you get cataleptically or catatonically depressed people who were so depressed that they wouldn't move for hours on end, And again, you had this sort of heaviness of limbs and this inability to, or some difficulty in being motivated to move. Mm-hmm. And you can have that through a relaxed therapeutic trance state, but also through the sort of worrying, stress, depressed trance state. So really, we're looking at a fixed, focused intensity of attention, and we're also looking at people being increasingly suggestible, which they are when they become very highly emotional. Which is why cult leaders, obviously like to get their followers highly emotional in order to program them with the beliefs of the particular cult.
So although they're focused and locked onto something that may need to be changed, they're also in a very suggestible state where you can actually work with them and do that?
Absolutely, yeah. It's unfortunately the huge what they are suggestible to, whilst they're in the emotional state, tends to be stuff that backs up the emotional state. So when you're angry, you can be angry about anything. You know, if you're angry with your partner, you go out for a walk, and you can be angry because someone's not walking fast enough in front of you in the street. You know, you find things to be angry about when you're depressed. Of course, you find things to fit the ideology of the depression, you know, and stuff that doesn't fit with that is kind of rejected or you know, subverted to fit the depressive pattern of mind. But certainly, you know, because these states of mind are so hypnotic, naturally hypnotic, then it makes sense that we use hypnosis to help the person learn how to use their attention in more therapeutic, you know, beneficial ways. Gurdjieff, you know, said that mankind is asleep, and we're all, you know, to greater or lesser degrees entranced by the world, and we need to sort of wake up from this trance, in a sense, in order to experience a greater reality. And you know, so if someone's been deeply traumatized for extended periods of time, they may find that, generally speaking, they feel more disassociated because their mind has been trying to protect them in times of trauma. Once that traumatic sort of history is over, they may be living a more or less normal life, but they still feel detached from everything because they're, you know, that protective mechanism of disassociation is still at work in the mind, even though it kind of no longer needs to be so much. So yeah, I think that's a very valid point.
When they're that deeply traumatized, are you able to re-engage them and re-engage them in life and eliminate that with hypnosis?
Yes, I mean, I found personally the rewind technique, as we now call it, formerly, or an adaptation of the visual kinesthetic disassociation technique, that word disassociation again. So you want to disassociate the person. First, you know, we need somebody to disassociate from the trauma to the extent that they can process it as something that was past and no longer current. You know, okay? If someone has PTSD, what their brain hasn't done is put it in the past. So every time they remember it or they have a flashback, they don't just remember it, they relive it as if it's happening now.
Right.
So what you do, you know, what you need to do, of course, is allow that memory to, or encourage that memory to be processed in the more narrative parts of the brain. So they know it was terrible at the time, but it no longer feels terrible to think about it now. They can choose to think about it or not, rather than have the memories unbidden come upon them. So yeah, we certainly use hypnosis. You know, I would see PTSD as a totally hypnotic phenomena, actually, the condition, you know, and so, you know, using hypnosis wisely and skillfully with precision, we can, you know, sort of lift traumatic experience, you know, very quickly. Often that's the case, anyway.
Mark, in a moment we're going to launch into all these questions about depression, but first you mentioned Milton Erickson and how you were influenced by his work. I know you use a lot of Ericksonian techniques. What about his approach impressed you so much, and why do you use it so much?
Well, Liv, that's another good question. And you know, I think what I liked so much about Milton Erickson was his pioneering attitude. You know, he tailored solution-focused psychotherapy to fit the individual that he had in front of him. So rather than just working from a ideology or seeing his patient through a sort of screen of ideology, he would see them directly. He would use their unique interests, their unique life histories, to engage with them rather than jargonizing psychology, or, you know, rather than sort of inflicting his jargon on them. He would learn their language and use it back to them. He you know, in a time where it was considered superficial to treat symptoms. Erickson was treating symptoms, you know, so he would seek to lift the person's anxiety, whereas at the time he was working in the 20th century, early 20th century, some of the time, he was, you know, the prevailing dogma, if you like, in psychiatry and psychotherapy was that you had to just focus on problems, just focus on the past, just focus on what's gone wrong, and also the belief that once you find out why a person's you know, developed problems, then somehow the problems would disappear. Whereas Erickson was just as much interested in the person's present situation, their social, biological, economic situation currently, and also, of course, their future. Which sounds kind of obvious to us, but at the time that was pretty sort of pioneering. He also, you know, would use hypnosis when hypnosis was a dirty word, back then. And certainly the idea of hypnosis for the treatment of depression, when he was using it for that, was seen as a big no-no. Somehow that was wrong, and that sort of belief persisted till pretty recently. So I see him as an incredibly uniquely sort of creative innovator of clinical hypnosis, and he also understood that people are metaphorical as well. People communicate in metaphors, and even organic metaphors. Someone has a pain in the neck, and there's no organic cause, but then he discovers that they have a particular relative who's being a complete nuisance to them. So he would notice how clients communicate in metaphor and use their metaphors back to them, so rather than say the one-size-fits-all Greek metaphors of the Freudian sort of school. So Erickson showed us how to, we could be flexible. He understood how hypnosis happened in everyday life, and how it can be applied through shock as well as relaxation, as well as focusing down on ideas that appealed to his unique clients. And he was also a master of conversational hypnosis as well. So rather than having strict sort of inductions that he'd learned from someone else, he would concoct inductions on the spur of the moment that fitted the person that he was with, which takes courage and flexibility. But I think he was a master of doing that. I think he had a deep understanding of human nature and communication, and he as much as he could, he taught that to other people. But he wasn't primarily a teacher, or he didn't set up a school of therapy. But people were so impressed with him that they learned from him by osmosis, by watching him, treat clients and patients for all manner of ailments.
It's obvious from all the things that you've said that hypnotherapy is really, really effective for use in depression. Do you think that it would ever take the place of a psychotherapeutic approach, or it should be used in combination with seeing a psychologist or psychiatrist?
Well, I mean, depression certainly is partly caused by over-rumination, worrying, build-up of stress. So depression used to be called nervous exhaustion, which I actually think is a better name for it, because it actually explains what it is. A build-up of stress over time leads to a sort of collapse in energy, which is what depression is, where a person feels they can't be motivated to get out of bed in the morning, they can't engage socially with people, they can't, it feels overwhelming to go out and do stuff for the job and so forth. And so there is this sort of collapse in energy. And yes, would hypnosis replace psychotherapy? I think hypnosis is part of psychotherapy. I think it's a powerful tool. And, depression has to do with how people think as well as how they feel. And, so we could use depression to help them start to feel better. But also we need to look at, what habitual thinking styles does this person have? Very typical thinking styles that depressed people, when they're depressed, exhibit, and how can we teach the person about these thinking styles? So there would be a bit of cognitive therapy with that, a bit of behavioral therapy, getting people to do things differently.
Right.
We'd use hypnosis. We'd use hypnosis to actually help lift mood and calm down. Because depressed people always have higher levels of stress hormone in the body, of cortisol. If we can relax that, then we start to sort of get a person to feel differently. So you need to attack depression, if you like, from different angles. So often people go to their doctor or general practitioner, as we call them here in the UK, as a first port of call, and the knee-jerk reaction is to give this person medication. Although you've been divorced, you've lost your job, and you've moved to a new area, so you haven't got social support. This is a chemical imbalance in your brain, and I think that's a mistake. And I can stick my neck out here about that there is a huge amount of evidence.
So
sorry.
I'm sorry. You don't believe that depression then is an illness?
I believe that it has neurobiological consequences which occur. But I don't necessarily think that it's as biologically caused, as genetic as people assume. It's risen by 1,000%. The incidence of depression has risen 1,000% in the last 50 years, and that accounts for reporting and public acceptance as well. Right. Genetics don't change that quickly. But certainly, It's also been known, I don't want to get too in depth, but it's also been known since the 1950s that people who are depressed dream at night 3 times as much as people who aren't depressed. And when they start to come out of depression, they start dreaming less. They start having more slow wave recuperative sleep. They wake up feeling more energized from their sleep rather than exhausted from their sleep. So what antidepressants do is they cut down on the REM sleep. So the person's having less REM sleep, but they still have, the emotions, the anger, the anxiety, and so forth,
right,
which aren't being discharged by the over-REMing, the over-dreaming at night any longer. And the person can start feeling angry and aggressive and so forth. Now, the increased suicide risk from Seroxat and other antidepressants may be because people are feeling more energized through the antidepressant, but they're still having the negative emotions. So now they can act on them and tragically perhaps put them into action by attempting suicide. So certainly depression is a neurobiological phenomena, but it's this is a result of depression as much as the cause of it, I think. I've been practicing hypnotherapy for nearly 20 years, and certain cases, of course, stand out in one's mind, other than your first ever case, which you always remember your first time. But there was a particular woman that came to see me who was holding down 2 jobs, but she was evidently full of stress, and it turns out that she had been systematically sexually abused by her uncle between the ages of 12 to 18, and he would awaken her during the night and molest her. And she was finding now, 25 years later, that she was waking up on the hour every hour. So she was, her brain was still responding as if it was still happening. And he had been a car mechanic, and whenever she smelled car fuel, she would have a flashback. So that was like a post-hypnotic trigger for her,
Right.
And I found that sort of working with her was, because she was so motivated on feeling better, it was very, very powerful. And we sort of dealt with the worst flashbacks, and eventually she stopped having flashbacks. She started to, her stress hormone levels in her body started to normalize. She began to think about getting a new career, and really the sort of pinnacle of that particular case for me was that she was going to see this man again. She was going to a family wedding, and he was going to be there. And I said, "So are you sure you want to go to this? He's going to be there." And she said, "Yeah, it's important for me to actually go there. And somehow I'm worried that he could do it again, even though he's a very old man now. But I want to sort of do this." And she went along, and she later reported that she'd gone along to this wedding, seen him there, and she'd felt so powerful, so much more powerful than him, as if he couldn't hurt her anymore, as if all that was way in the past. It's not that she'd forgiven him, but she'd risen above him in a sense. And that to me, just a transformation in her, as you both must have seen as well in your practice. When a whole life transforms in that way, is incredibly powerful, and always stays with you, and always gives you confidence as well that you can help people. There was another case of a man. You mentioned the Metropolitan Police in the beginning, and there was a guy who'd been on Clapham rail disaster, which I think was in 1999, and he'd been in one of the front carriages, and he'd seen the carnage around him, but he hadn't been too physically badly damaged. But months later, he was still unable to go on a train, and I went to visit him in his home because he'd become agoraphobic. He couldn't leave his house, and I noticed that you could hear the train at the bottom of his garden every half an hour, and every time that happened, he sort of reignited his anxiety response,
Wow.
So, but also, as you both would have noticed probably as well, that fear and anxiety often spread. So a car isn't a train, but it's metal, and it contains people, and it moves, and it's transport, and so it's enough for his unconscious mind to link that to a train. So now he's frightened of going on in cars as well, and again using hypnosis to put the memory where it should be, not as something currently threatening, but something that was awful in the past but no longer troubles him. Then he could start living his life again, and going back on trains, and again become a fully sort of functional human being. So I mean, one of the most unusual cases I've had as a hypnotist was actually during a public demonstration where a woman had a profound fear of belly buttons. but you may laugh, and I was tempted, but for her, it was as extreme fear as someone who has been held at gunpoint. So in a way, fear is fear, and it doesn't matter what it's directed at. And she again had this view, but the way to test that the treatment had worked in front of a crowd of people was actually to show her my belly button. the risk to my own self-esteem and self-respect, and it was absolutely fine. And it had gone back to she'd had an operation, and she'd remembered they said we're going to have to operate through your belly button, and this had just stuck in her mind during this emergency operation from years ago. The word belly button, she couldn't even say belly button at the beginning of the treatment. We couldn't even say the words. That was probably one of the more extreme ones. But as I see, fear is fear, and fear can focus on anything. It's like Midsummer Night's Dream, where Shakespeare talks about the love potion, and the first thing you see when you awaken, you'll fall in love with, and it could be anything, and fear is like that. Fear can actually attach to anything at all. So some of the more bizarre phobias you get, although they might seem strange, and people can be unsympathetic because they're so odd, but the person suffering them is as traumatic as someone who's been mugged or.
We would never laugh at someone coming into an office. People have undescribable fears of almost anything, and if those people are listening, hypnosis can really help with that. Like Mark said, they don't get very much sympathy from people around them that think maybe their fears are silly, but they're never silly. They're always rooted in something very important. In that instance, the woman being told that surgery would have to happen through her belly button. So moving on from that, Mark, what advice would you give people that want to learn the therapeutic use of hypnosis starting out now?
Okay, well, I would suggest that they would need to be confident in hypnosis. I mean, in a way, there's been a mystique around hypnosis, and that's partly because, Anton Mesmer of mesmerism back in the 18th century was a fantastic hypnotherapist, but he talked about animal magnetism and universal fluids and all this kind of thing, and it was investigated by none other than Benjamin Franklin and other sort of worthies, and they of course couldn't find any evidence for this. So in a sense, hypnosis got a bad rap as unscientific somehow, as a bit mystical, as a non-mainstream. And I would say be confident in hypnosis, because so often through my career, people have, I've been sent patients from doctors, from clinical psychologists, people who couldn't help, and actually, you find that using hypnosis can help these people very quickly. So, in a sense, it's the creme de la creme of psychotherapeutic technique. And don't be embarrassed about learning it, because it's incredibly powerful. It's a wonderful tool. And I'd also say learn it in the context of a good psychotherapeutic model. Solution-focused, time-limited. Rather than, for example, there is a certain school here in the UK who believe that every symptom that somebody has, including asthma or diabetes, can be traced back to particular abuse that they don't remember as a child. And under hypnosis, people have suddenly recovered, in inverted commas, memories that weren't there before. If you know anything about hypnosis, you know that some of these memories can be concocted sometimes through hypnosis. Mm-hmm. So that's a very dangerous ideology. So what I'm saying is that if you learn hypnotherapy, learn it within a sensible, research-based ideology, and which is coherent, which makes sense and makes common sense to you as well.
Right. We had several cases of people, children in a particular area, I think it was California, who said that they had been sexually abused in satanic rites. It was all fabricated. The whole thing was fabricated, but several people, I think, went to jail over it.
Yeah. I mean, it's most people who've been abused remember the abuse. We tend to remember really, really bad stuff that's happened. We tend to remember it too well, and that's the problem. That's what PTSD is. The idea is that a certain symptom must mean that you had a certain form of abuse is terrible misuse of overconfidence. Right. As far as a therapist is concerned, therapists need to be grounded in common sense. my parting shot would be that hypnotherapy was really the mother of all psychotherapy. Certainly in the West, with Franz Anton Mesmer, who got amazing results with people. It sort of went underground for a while, and until recently it was seen as something alternative. But actually, I would say that used well within a really intelligent, common sense psychotherapeutic framework, can be the most powerful thing that you can use in order to enhance performance, but also overcome all kinds of problems in life.
Well, thank you so very, very much. We just really appreciate you, Mark.
Thank you for listening to Change Your Mind, Change Your Life with your hosts, Jim and Lynn Swearingen.